In this week's Jaunts with John T, I have the third and final installment in my series on everything you need to know about going on a Viking cruise, focusing on everything that happens after your cruise is over, including debarkation, and I will have some lessons learned. Howdy, and welcome to Jaunts with John T. I am John T, and this week I'm doing our third and final installment in my series on everything that you need to know to go on a Viking cruise. Now today I will include everything that happens after your cruise is over. Now that mostly includes the disembarkation or debarkation, whichever it's called, process, and also at the end of that I will talk about some lessons learned from the cruise. Alright, let's start with the disembarkation process. Now, full disclosure, we were on a cruise to Iceland on Viking that started and ended in Reykjavik. Now, I assume that this entire process is very similar, if not exactly the same, for other Viking cruises. I also assume that it's probably very similar for any cruise line, but we're newbies to cruising. This is the first time we ever went on a cruise, so honestly, I really don't have anything to compare it to. So the details of your particular experience obviously might vary. Alright, so the disembarkation process started with the arrival in our stateroom the night before the end of our cruise of like a flyer along with 5 of these tags. Now ours you see says purple 2, and there were other colors and other numbers as well, but ours was purple 2. Now the instructions basically said this. First of all, they said to put these tags on your luggage. Take all of the tags off and put these tags on your luggage, and then leave your luggage outside of your stateroom door. They would come by later to pick up the luggage, and then we would see it the next day after leaving the ship in the terminal. I do want to add something here about the terminal in Reykjavik. Like I said, I'm a newbie to cruising, so I've never seen another terminal, but I have seen videos on terminals departing from places like Cape Canaveral in Florida and things like that, which are these huge terminals with multiple places and multiple ships and all that kind of stuff. Reykjavik is not that. Now there were 2 ships that were there while we were there, our ship as well as a Norwegian Cruise Line ship. I don't think, it didn't look to me like they could hold many more, maybe one more, but the terminal was quite small. So obviously a lot of what I say with how this whole process worked kind of relates to the fact that the terminal was very small. Okay, but getting back to what the flyer said. Like I said, put the tags on the luggage will be taken away, and it'll be down in the terminal the next morning. Another thing that the flyer said was that there would be somebody in the terminal who would be there to scan our boarding passes, and they would print out luggage tags that they would then put onto our luggage. Our luggage then would be taken away, and we would see it again basically when we arrived at our final destination, which in our case was Portland. It also told us that we should download our boarding passes ahead of time, as this would expedite the entire process, which is something that we did. Now the final thing that the flyer said was basically, if you have any questions, there will be Viking representatives at the terminal that you can talk to. More on that later. One thing that was kind of interesting, kind of funny really, was that we would tag our luggage and then we'd put it outside of our stateroom, and by the time we got out there with another piece of luggage, the piece of luggage that we put out before was already gone. Alright, so the next morning, as instructed, we got off the ship and we went down to the terminal. Now there were different times that were assigned to when people were getting off of the ship. I think the last time was 11 o'clock. Our time was 8:15, pretty early. It was because we were in basically one kind of the lower level staterooms, I assume, plus we don't have like Viking status or anything like that. So we had an early disembarkation time. Also something to be aware of, as I said, our tag said purple 2. Honestly, when I saw the tag, all that really registered with me was the fact that it said purple. I kind of assumed it was like red 1, purple 2, green 3, blue 4, something like that, but it wasn't. There were actually either 4 or 5 different purple numbers. So it's not just the color of your tag, it's also the number of your tag. Now the flyer also told us that said that we would be disembarking at 8:15, and I heard later that purple 1 and purple 2 were both 8:15, so we knew we were either purple 1 or purple 2. Turns out we were purple 2. All right, so the next morning, as I said, we disembarked and we arrived at the terminal. Sure enough, our luggage was there waiting for us, just as they said it would be, and there was somebody there to scan our boarding passes. A little minor note here, we added extra luggage to our boarding passes. The reason why we did that was because we knew that we were going to have several hours to spend in Reykjavik that morning because our flight wasn't until later in the afternoon, and we didn't want to have to carry around luggage with us all the time in Reykjavik. So we took two of our kind of carry-on rolling bags that we normally would carry on, and we decided to check them instead. When we got there and we scanned our boarding passes, well, we scanned Charlie's first. There was an extra bag on Charlie's boarding pass and there was an extra bag on my boarding pass. We scanned Charlie's first and only one luggage tag was printed out, which got us a little bit concerned, and we talked to the guy about it and he said, I don't know, I scanned it, only one came out. So I thought, well, what happens if we scanned it again? So we scanned it again, and sure enough, the second tag printed out. So if you do have two luggage tags, it might be that you have to scan your boarding pass twice in order to get both luggage tags. So once we did that, we were kind of like, what next? What do we do now? So we walked outside of the terminal, and we saw that there were some buses and people there kind of helping people out. And like I said, the flyer said, if you have any questions, talk to a Viking rep. So I went up to this young lady. Oh, and Viking reps, by the way, always wear these red coats, right? Or red shirts or something. They're always in red. So I walked up to this young lady and I said, hey, what do we do now? And she was like, well, I don't really know. And it turned out that she was with the company that was running the buses, not with Viking. They also had red coats, so I thought that she was with Viking, but she wasn't. She said, let's go talk to a Viking rep. And the Viking rep said, that what you want to do is you want to look for the bus that says, again, you guessed it, Purple 2. And they said that bus would take us to the Harpa Center. The Harpa Center, by the way, whenever we left the ship to go, when we left the ship from Reykjavik to go into town, we would take a bus to Harpa Center. The dock itself is a few miles away from the main part of town. It's about 1.5 miles, maybe 2 miles from Harpa Center. It's kind of a musical venue type of place where they do concerts and things like that. And it also was about maybe a 1/4 mile from the center of town. So very close to the center of town. So the bus took us, that was marked Purple 2, took us to the Harpa Center and dropped us off there. When we arrived at the Harpa Center, there were some Viking reps there, and they told us where to go. And we got to this room in the back of the center, and there was a kiosk there. And the person from Viking said, okay, here's the bus schedule to go to the airport. Now the bus schedule was, had multiple buses that arrived at that left for the airport at different times. And our bus was, you guessed it, Purple 2. So Purple 2 was leaving at 1:00 p.m. Our flight was at 5, so that sounded fine. It was about a 45-minute drive to the airport. We're a little paranoid about getting to airports, especially foreign airports, on time. We probably left to our own devices, would have left earlier, but that was when the bus left, so that was when we were going to leave. Now, the other thing that they had there was they had a whole spread there with food and everything, and while we were there, it was mostly breakfast food. They had croissants and pastries and some hot food and lots of food, actually. I did take a look at it and noticed that the food was definitely not the same food as they had on the ship. So it was definitely done by somebody different. I also noticed, which I thought was kind of interesting, was that a bunch of tables were marked with embarkation. There were a lot of tables there. This room could have held easily 200 or 300 people, I would say. There were several tables, and some of them said embarkation. I also, as people were arriving, I heard some of the Viking reps telling people, oh, if you're an embarking guest, then do this or whatever. So I realized that this is the same place that they put people who arrived early before they could get on the ship. Now, in our case, of course, we never saw that because by the time we got to the ship, it was like between 4 and 5 in the afternoon, and we could just go straight on the ship. But if you got there early, there was this area where you could sit and they had food and stuff like that before you got on the ship. So this was a place where we could wait and wait for our bus, which again was going to leave at 1:00. So this was going to be in about 3.5 hours from the time that we were there. They also told us that somebody would be there at the kiosk all day, so we could feel free to leave our bags there at the Harpa Center, which was really nice. Even though we checked all of our main bags, we still had backpacks and carry-ons and stuff like that. And it was nice to not have to carry them around. We just left them there at the desk and then we went into Reykjavik. It was nice, we spent a couple hours, we walked around, and it actually started raining. It was actually the hardest rain that we had the entire trip, to be quite honest. It started raining fairly heavily, and so we decided to duck into this cute little coffee shop, and we had some lattes, really good lattes actually. And so that was enjoyable, and we saw the Rainbow Street and walked into a couple of the shops. Usual thing, just walked around for a couple of hours. And then ultimately we said, okay, it's time to go back. So we went back to the Harpa Center. We got there about 12:30, I think. And then sure enough, at 12:45, they called out Purple 2 and told us to get on our bus. And that bus then took us to the airport, and that was the end of our trip. Well, at least it was the end of the cruise part of our trip. We still had to get home. I do have some thoughts on the whole disembarkation process that I'd like to share. The Reykjavik terminal, as I think I mentioned before, is very small, and it really couldn't support having, the big buffet and everything that they had at the Harpa Center, which I think is one reason why they transported us from Reykjavik to the Harpa Center. And I don't know whether this is true or not, but I know that a lot of other cruise terminals, like the ones they have in Cape Canaveral and places like that, are much larger. And perhaps they have facilities there in the terminals in order to be able to do something like that, but they definitely don't at Reykjavik, which might be the reason why they moved us from Reykjavik to the Harpa Center. The main thing I really want to say, though, is there is one simple way that I really think the entire process could have been improved. I have no idea if anybody from Viking is ever going to watch this, but if anybody from Viking does watch this, this is something you might want to think about. As I mentioned before, the sheet that they gave us in our staterooms the night before basically said, if you have any questions, ask a Viking representative. Well, that's all well and good, but they could have just simply printed out more detailed instructions on that sheet itself, and it would have made the entire process much simpler. It would have been pretty easy to do. They could have just said, go down to the terminal. You'll take a bus that is marked Purple 2 or marked with the same color number as your tag or whatever, and that will take you to the Harpa Center, and we will have food for you there, and then there will be a bus that will take you to your airport, once again marked with the same number and color as is on your tag. If it had simply said that, then we would have known what to do, and we wouldn't have had to ask anybody, and there would have been no confusion. But for some reason, they chose instead to just say, if you have any questions, ask a Viking representative. I suppose, some people are seasoned Viking cruisers, or some people are just more seasoned cruisers in general, and they just kind of know what the drill is, but we were newbies, so we had no idea. So I think that would be something that would really help out. All right, now before we move on to lessons learned, as usual, I'm going to make my usual plea to say, please be sure to like this video. I mean, if you're still watching it, I'm assuming you are liking it. If you are still watching it and you don't like it, then, why? So I assume you'll like it if you're still here, so please be sure to like it. It just takes one click of the button, and it really does help the channel out, and I'd really appreciate it. And obviously, share this with anybody who you think might be able to benefit from it. I would love to hear from people who've taken other Viking cruises of what their disembarkation process was like versus what our disembarkation process was like. I'm really interested in knowing if it's a lot different on different cruises. And of course, finally, please subscribe. It really does help out the channel. There's nothing more that you can do. The best thing you can do is to subscribe. Click one button, that's all it takes. And if you hit that notification bell, that way you'll be informed of future videos. All right, so let's get on to the lessons learned. The first lesson learned for me, and this was a biggie, and in preparation for this cruise, I watched lots of different cruise videos on YouTube and stuff, and this is something they mention all the time, and yet, stupid me, I didn't do it. And that was, be sure to always read the newsletter that you get every day in your stateroom, whether it's a printed newsletter or whether it's something that's online, whatever it is, something that has all the details about the day's itinerary and the day's activities, be sure to read that and see what's in there. We got one every day. It was called the Viking Daily, and it was delivered into our stateroom every day. Now, I did actually read part of it. I mean, I always read the part about, where the excursions were going to meet and that sort of thing. But I didn't go through and really read the entire itinerary. And that was something that I really should have done. In particular, there was one particular event that they had. It's actually in this particular edition. It was on 7:30 in the Explorers Lounge. They had a, what was it called? A Polar Arctic Circle toast. Basically, our cruise went across the Arctic Circle, and we were in the Arctic Circle for a couple of days. And as we passed over the Arctic, actually we passed over it twice, but the first time that we passed over the Arctic Circle, they had a gathering in the Explorers Lounge, and they gave a toast and all that. I did see it. I was there, but I was there after the toast, and I just kind of saw the aftermath. And I really thought, oh, I wish I'd come to do this. This would have been a lot of fun. And I missed out because I wasn't reading the daily newsletter. And by the way, along those lines, we did get this, which is really cool. This is a little, like a certificate that says that we passed above the Arctic Circle. It's got the day that we passed above and everything. So that's kind of cool. The second, I think, big lesson learned, and I'm going to apply it to this specific cruise, but I think you can take it and apply it to other cruises as well. There was one of the excursions that you could do in Reykjavik was called the Golden Circle Tour. It was basically kind of a tour all around Western Iceland and in the whole Reykjavik area. It was like an all-day tour, and it was very expensive, which is why we didn't do it, frankly. But we did find out that there were other companies that offered similar tours that were a lot less expensive. And what we should have done is we should have gotten there a day earlier, and we should have booked that Golden Circle tour on some other company that would have been less expensive, and we should have done that the day before our cruise started. So I guess what my lesson learned is to really look at where you're going and where you're going to be, and ask yourself, is there something that we want to do while we're there that we can maybe tag on a day beforehand? And it doesn't have to necessarily be something that is directly affiliated with the cruise line, but it's something that you can do just on any kind of an excursion. Another thing I definitely would have done is bring a spare battery, especially if you're going on any really long excursions where you're going to be off the ship for a long time. We did one particular excursion where we went to a glacier bay, and we were gone basically all day. We left first thing in the morning, and we were literally on the last tender to get back on the ship coming back. And that was a very long trip, and there were no USB ports on the bus. I know a lot of new buses do have those, but this bus didn't. And as a result, our phones all ran out of battery. Now, mine didn't because I was using this camera, because what really uses your battery on your phone is taking a lot of pictures and videos. But Andy's camera completely ran out of battery. I think it ran out of battery before we left the Glacier Bay. I really don't remember. But she definitely did run out of battery eventually, and she ended up borrowing my phone to take some additional pictures because she wasn't able to take any more pictures. So bear that in mind, and just in case, I would say bring along that spare battery. Another thing to keep in mind is that you are going to need cash for tips. Now, I know that you usually pay tips on the ship in kind of one lump sum, and on Viking they called it crew appreciation, and it was something that we just added onto our onto our cruise, so we didn't have to worry about it while we were there. And that's all fine and well, but that is only applies to the ship. And especially if you're going to do excursions and things like that, basically we tipped every driver that we had, we tipped every tour guide that we had, and of course we tipped other people as well. So something to bear in mind is that you do want to have cash for tips, and you want to make sure that you have cash that is in the denomination that is used in that country. So make sure that you have some cash on hand in that denomination. And additionally, along those lines, try to make sure that they're small bills. One problem that we had is we had a bunch of larger bills. They were equivalent to $50 bills or something like that. So we had to take those and get them, broken down into smaller bills so that we could give people tips along the way. Another big one for me was to be sure to bring some sandals or water shoes or something like that for walking around the ship when you want to use the pool or something like that. That's just something I didn't think of, to be quite honest. They did have slippers in the room, but I would have preferred to have my own sandals or something that I could walk around the deck in on days that we went to go swimming. When you book your room, be sure to look at where the room is in approximation to where the elevators are. You don't want to be too far, which is what we were. We were actually quite a ways from the elevator. And you don't want to be too close either, because that can be really noisy. So I think kind of the sweet spot is maybe 6 or 8 rooms away from the elevator. I think that's kind of like the perfect place to be. We were quite a ways from the elevator, so anytime we wanted to leave the room to go to any other floor, we had to do quite a bit of a walk. Now, this is something that only applies to Viking. Well, I assume there are other cruise lines that it applies to, but it specifically applies to Viking cruises. And that is to be sure that you understand that the included beer and wine is included beer and wine with meals. That's obviously the way that they state it, and I'm not saying they're trying to pull a fast one or anything, but that is the way that it is stated, and that is the way it works. If you're having lunch, I guess if you're having breakfast too, if you want to have wine with your breakfast, but if you're having lunch, if you're having dinner, you want to have a glass of wine, it's included. That does not mean that you can get wine or beer at one of the bars though. If you get wine or beer at one of the bars, that you have to pay extra for. And frankly, what I would do is I wouldn't bother getting the wine or beer that sort of comes included with your meals. I would get either a better wine or a better beer, or I'd get a cocktail. And I wouldn't really do just the regular beer or wine because, why pay a couple of extra bucks for something that you can get for free the next time you have a meal? Another important tip is to be sure to check the weather on the day after you disembark from the ship, on the day that, if you're going to be spending any time ashore after you leave the ship, but before you get on your flight, like we did. We didn't really think about it, and sure enough, that particular day was very rainy, and we should have taken raincoats. We didn't. We packed the raincoats. So be sure to look at the weather for that last day there, and be sure that you have whatever clothing items that you're going to need out of your suitcase, and you have them available for that last day. And lastly, be sure to look at which side of the ship that you're on, and ask yourself the question, is one side going to be better than the other side? Now, in the case of our particular cruise, it didn't really matter. When we were out in the ocean, we were out in the middle of the ocean, and it was just ocean from both sides. And when we went into port, we usually went through like fjords and stuff like that, where there was beautiful scenery on both sides of the ship. So it didn't really matter for our particular cruise. But I do think that for some cruises it probably does matter. I'm thinking maybe for cruises to Alaska it might matter. I'm not really sure. I've never been on an Alaskan cruise. But it seems to me there might be some cruises where, there's things that you're going to want to see from the ship that you're going to be able to see from one side but not from another. So keep that in mind when you book which side that you're going to be on. Okay, well that's going to do it for this video. I really hope you liked it. And as usual, please, if you did, be sure to hit that like button. It really, really does help this channel out. Now here at Jaunts with John T, we go on jaunts around the world, around the country, around the state, around the city, and sometimes just around the house. So if that sounds like fun to you, please be sure to subscribe and smash that notification bell, because that way you'll be notified of future videos. And if you want to see any more of our videos from our trip to Iceland, then you can click right about here. Now that's going to do it for now. I am John T, and until I can figure out a better sign off, thanks for watching.